She poured coffee for the veteran with the service dog, right in front of the health inspector. Her supervisor didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. His words cut like ice. "You're terminated, Maddie. Clear out your locker now." 6 years of dedication vanished in an instant. She didn't plead her case or shed a tear. She simply untied her apron with trembling hands and walked away. Not because she broke protocol, but because she defended a veteran with a service animal who needed a safe space. What Maddie couldn't have known was that someone captured the entire incident on video. And within 60 minutes, a convoy of 4 military Humvees rumbled into the parking lot. Leading them was a Marine colonel who once owed his life to that very same veteran. From that moment forward, nothing would ever be the same again. Welcome to Heartland Heroes, where stories of compassion and courage come to light. Let's discover what truly unfolded that day. I'm Sophia Jenkins, and I've been working at Liberty Perks Café in Millbrook, North Carolina for 2 years now. I handle the morning shift, arriving at 5 a.m. and finishing by 10 a.m. It's a small community with strong military ties. We're just a quarter hour from Fort Garrison, one of the nation's premier Marine Corps training facilities on the Atlantic seaboard. Everyone here has connections to someone in uniform. Most residents are either service members or have family who serve. That's what made Liberty Perks so special. Not the beverages we served, but because of her. Maddie wasn't just our supervisor. She embodied the soul of our establishment. She knew everyone's name, their children's birthdays, when deployments were happening. She maintained this worn leather journal behind the register filled with personal details. Mr. Wilson prefers extra nutmeg on top. Or Mrs. Thompson lost her daughter last spring. Check how she's doing today. She organized veterans' coffee gatherings every Wednesday, ensuring any vet with a service animal never had to explain themselves because she understood. Her father served as a Marine, now retired, but he'd visit with his companions on Wednesdays, sharing memories over black coffee and freshly baked muffins. Maddie always said, "This cafe kept him grounded." I just want to continue that legacy. Then came that fateful morning, shortly after 9, a brisk Wednesday, the kind of day where steam rose from hot cups like spirits ascending. James Walker entered with his German shepherd, Duke, a tall, reserved man who always chose the window seat. Rarely spoke, but Duke never left his side. The canine wore his crimson vest with "Service Dog, Do Not Pet" embroidered in bold white lettering. Maddie stood behind the counter. I was handling espresso orders. She smiled warmly at James and gestured hello. That's when he strode in. Kyle Benson, the newly appointed district health inspector. I'd encountered him once previously, which was sufficient. He carried himself like someone who enjoyed shutting down establishments. Perfectly pressed attire, clipboard clutched tightly beneath his arm like a weapon. His gaze scanned the room methodically, then locked onto Duke. He froze. "This constitutes a violation," he announced loud enough for everyone to hear. James's hand quivered against his cup. Maddie approached, composed and professional. "Sir, he's a registered service animal. ADA regulations protect his right to be here." Benson's complexion darkened. "I don't care what classification of animal it is. You're serving food. It's unsanitary." "It's federal legislation," Maddie replied, maintaining her composure. "That can't simply be disregarded." "I can enforce whatever I want," he snapped. "This establishment will receive citations and face closure unless that creature is removed immediately." James stood, startled. Duke pressed closer against his leg, sensing the tension. The entire cafe fell silent. You could hear nothing but the hissing of the milk steamer. Then Maddie spoke words I'll never forget. "I won't eject a veteran and his service dog to accommodate your preferences, sir." That was it. Before everyone, patrons, staff, even elderly Mr. Franklin, who barely hears anything, and Regional Director Susan Hanley, who happened to be conducting a routine evaluation, she erupted. "You're fired, Maddie. Empty your locker immediately." Gasps, then silence. Maddie didn't argue or break down. She removed her apron, passed by me and whispered, "Make sure James receives his coffee, okay?" She exited through the side entrance. Her father hadn't even arrived for Veterans Coffee Hour yet. I stood there completely uncertain what to do, but the Marines knew exactly how to respond. 35 minutes later, while wiping down the counter, I heard it. A deep, steady rumble. Initially, I thought it was thunder, but the sound grew heavier, boots striking pavement, tires rolling deliberately. The windows began to vibrate. I peered outside. My mouth fell open. 4 military vehicles pulled into the lot, followed by dozens of uniformed personnel. Not just anyone, Colonel Adam Reynolds, Fort Garrison's commanding officer. He emerged first, expression unreadable. His gaze swept across the café, then fixed on me through the glass. I could barely breathe. The doors swung open, and instantly everything transformed. The bell above the entrance chimed, but nobody inside moved. We stood motionless as the Marines entered, boots striking the tile like a measured countdown. Perhaps 20 of them, each in full dress blues, medals, ribbons, creases sharp enough to slice paper. And at their center, Colonel Reynolds. He wasn't particularly tall or loud, but the atmosphere shifted when he entered, as if gravity intensified around him. You felt it viscerally. I'd seen him at community functions, parades, fundraisers, but never like this. Never with that look in his eyes. He walked directly to the register. "Is James Walker present?" His voice was low, steady, like the calm preceding a violent storm. James rose slowly from his corner table, Duke standing alongside him. His hands trembled slightly, but he nodded. "Yes, sir." Colonel Reynolds turned toward him. What happened next remains etched in my memory. He raised his hand in a deliberate, measured salute. James froze. Then, barely perceptibly, he returned the gesture. Every Marine in the cafe followed suit. The entire room saluted one man. Customers stood in reverent silence. Even Mr. Benson, the inspector, paled visibly. His clipboard dipped in his grasp. Colonel Reynolds maintained the salute, then lowered his hand and turned toward him. "You must be Mr. Benson," he said coolly. "I've examined your report from this morning." Benson stammered. I didn't realize he was..." Someone's identity shouldn't determine whether they receive fundamental respect. The colonel's tone remained level. It didn't need elevation. Benson swallowed hard. Then Colonel Reynolds shifted his attention to Susan Hanley, the regional manager who had terminated Maddie less than an hour earlier. "I understand your company enforces zero tolerance for employees who contradict health regulations," he stated. "But I wonder, do you have protocols for when your staff upholds federal legislation and defends a decorated combat veteran?" Susan shifted uncomfortably. "Colonel, I wasn't aware you were..." He interrupted her. "You witnessed everything and dismissed her anyway." That's when Maddie's father entered. He didn't even remove his jacket. He halted at the sight of all the uniforms, then noticed Colonel Reynolds and stood motionless. "Colonel," he uttered, astonished. Reynolds smiled and approached. "Good to see you again, Sergeant Crane." They clasped hands like comrades from shared battles. Maddie's father looked around, bewildered. "What's happening here?" "We've come for your daughter." Those words resonated through the room like a shockwave. Meanwhile, I slipped into the back where Maddie had been gathering her belongings. She sat on a bench, staring at her nameplate. "Still here?" she asked without turning. "Someone wants to speak with you," I replied. She sighed. "If it's Susan, she can keep her apology." "It's not Susan." Then I opened the door as the colonel stepped inside. Maddie stood immediately, brushing crumbs from her lap as though reporting for duty. "Miss Crane," he said gently, "I wanted to address you personally." She blinked in surprise. "Sir?" "I've been monitoring your work here. Veterans coffee hours, service animal support. You've built a community that rivals what exists on our base. You haven't just served beverages, you've served us." She swallowed hard. "I was simply doing what seemed right. That's precisely why I'm offering you a position." She stared at him, stunned. "I'm launching a new veteran outreach initiative at Fort Garrison. We need someone who comprehends not just regulations, but people. Someone who cares enough to stand firm when it matters." Maddie's jaw dropped. She glanced at me. I nodded encouragingly. You'd be perfect, I affirmed. She turned back to him. I'm, I don't know how to respond. Say yes, he smiled. Outside, news was circulating. People had begun gathering around the cafe, observing the military vehicles and capturing photos. Several local journalists arrived. Someone initiated a Facebook livestream. The story was spreading, but the Marines weren't finished. Colonel Reynolds addressed the remaining customers. If anyone witnessed this morning's events, I encourage you to provide statements. We're pursuing this through the state attorney's office. That's when James stepped forward. His voice was gentle but clear. She protected me, he said. That woman, Maddie, she didn't just provide coffee. She created a space where I could breathe normally, a place where nobody viewed me as damage. She allowed me to feel human again. Duke nudged his leg and settled beside him. The colonel nodded solemnly. That moment remains indelible in my memory. 2 hours later, the cafe closed early. Maddie departed with Colonel Reynolds, heading to Fort Garrison to tour her potential new workplace. Susan Hanley was escorted into a private meeting with corporate executives, and Mr. Benson was removed from the premises by a uniformed officer. By sunset, the entire community had learned what transpired. By morning, the image of Maddie standing outside the cafe beside Colonel Reynolds had gone viral. But nothing compared to what awaited her the following day, a manila envelope resting quietly on her apartment doorstep. Inside lay a handwritten note and a silver star. James had never disclosed earning it, but now he was presenting it to her for courage. He wrote, "Because you showed me what true bravery looks like." When Maddie emerged from the Jeep at Fort Garrison, something in the atmosphere shifted. It wasn't the magnitude of the installation or the organized activity of troops jogging past during drills echoing in the distance. It was how every Marine who passed seemed to recognize her. Some nodded, others offered a respectful ma'am. Several even smiled as though they knew her face from somewhere. Because they did. The footage of her standing resolute in that cafe had been viewed by thousands within 24 hours. By the time she arrived on base, Maddie Crane had become symbolic, a barista who refused to remain silent when others did nothing. Colonel Reynolds walked beside her, his pace measured and calm. "You've created quite an impression," he remarked. "That wasn't my intention," she replied, eyes widening as they passed recruits standing at attention. "That's precisely why it resonated," he said simply. They entered headquarters through tall glass doors flanked by flags billowing in the afternoon breeze. Inside, everything appeared pristine, ordered, and humming with quiet purpose. Maddie followed the colonel into a conference room overlooking the parade grounds. A folder waited on the table. "Please sit," he invited. She complied, still struggling to believe this was actually happening. "I want complete transparency with you," he said, sitting across from her. "This isn't an honorary title. The role I'm offering carries significant responsibility. You'd oversee 3 major programs: Veteran Transition Assistance, Community Mental Health Outreach, and the Service Animal Partnership Initiative." Maddie blinked in surprise. "That's considerable responsibility." "You've already managed most of it independently," he noted, gesturing toward the folder. "We've monitored Liberty Perks, especially Veterans Coffee Hour. That modest gathering evolved into one of the region's strongest peer support networks." He paused. "I read James Walker's statement this morning. It was sincere, powerful." Maddie looked downward. "He's endured tremendous hardship." "More than most realize," the colonel said, his voice suddenly quieter. He opened the folder and slid a document toward her. It was a redacted report, sections blacked out, but one passage remained visible. "Sergeant James Walker, Silver Star recipient, Operation Sandstorm, Kandahar Province, May 2009. Extracted 3 wounded teammates under heavy fire. Lost 3 digits. Diagnosed PTSD Category 4. Cleared for civilian transition 2012. Maddie read it twice. "I had no idea," she whispered. "He doesn't discuss it. Not even with us." She looked up. "But he trusts Duke, and he trusts you." That afternoon, Maddie toured the facility. She met therapists, social workers, and a retired Navy corpsman who'd lost his leg and now directed the K-9 pairing division. The man, Chief Petty Officer Brian Morgan, walked with a prosthetic and a cane carved with an eagle's talon wrapping around the handle. He smiled upon seeing her. "You're the coffee lady," he said, shaking her hand. "Guilty as charged. Veterans speak more about your café than their own family sometimes. You possess something rare, Miss Crane. You listen. That matters more than degrees or titles." He introduced her to three veterans currently awaiting pairing with service dogs. One, a young woman named Rebecca, barely 23, had burned scars extending down her neck and arms and hadn't spoken a word in 2 months, until she saw Maddie. "I recognize you," Rebecca said quietly. "You're the woman from the video." Maddie knelt beside her. "I'm just an ordinary person who made some noise, but I'm truly glad you're here." Rebecca glanced at the German shepherd lying beside her bed. "Her name's Aurora," she said. "They say she belongs with me. I don't know if I deserve her." "You absolutely do," Maddie responded without hesitation. "You absolutely do." That night back in her apartment, Maddie couldn't sleep. She sat on her sofa, gazing at the silver star James had given her. It rested in a simple velvet box. No message, no ceremony, just quiet wait. Her phone vibrated. It was me. "The entire town's talking about you. Liberty Perks is chaos without you. Sophia, you're managing perfectly. Not the same. Are you returning?" Maddie didn't respond immediately. She reflected on everything she'd witnessed that day. The wounded, the hopeful, those still carrying invisible burdens. And she thought about Rebecca, about James, about her father. She finally typed, "I believe I'm exactly where I need to be." But not everyone shared in the celebration. Inside a dimly lit office on the second floor of the Regional Health Department building, Mr. Kyle Benson sat before a glowing monitor, a half-empty coffee cup beside him. He replayed the video again, the one showing him berating James, where Maddie stood firm, where the colonel intervened. He muttered under his breath, "Made me appear foolish." A knock interrupted. He hastily closed the browser. "Enter." A man in a tailored gray suit stepped inside. He wasn't from the local office. He wore a gold pin on his lapel, a bald eagle clutching arrows. "I represent internal affairs," the man stated. "We need to discuss your professional conduct." Kyle Benson's complexion drained completely, and just like that, the dynamics began to reverse. James Walker never intended to share his experiences. He disliked speaking before groups. Not before deployment. Certainly not afterward. But when Wednesday arrived again, and veterans gathered at Fort Garrison's new outreach center, something within him changed. Maddie was present, arranging fresh coffee, wiping down the long wooden table, adjusting chairs precisely as she had at Liberty Perks. It wasn't a cafe anymore, but it felt like one, and that made all the difference. The room remained quiet that morning. 10 veterans sat in a loose circle, familiar faces and new arrivals, men and women, some young, some gray-haired. Rebecca sat with Aurora at her feet. She hadn't spoken much recently, but she hadn't missed a single session either. James entered last as usual. Duke padded alongside him, steadfast as always. He didn't immediately sit. He stood at the group's perimeter, one hand resting on Duke's collar. "I don't know why I'm standing," he began. His voice sounded uncertain, hesitant. "I've never discussed this aloud before." Maddie looked up but remained still. Just listened. James swallowed with difficulty. "It happened in 2009. Kandahar, Operation Sandstorm. We were exposed when our convoy struck an IED. The vehicle behind us erupted first." He paused. 3 soldiers were inside. 1 died instantly. The other 2 were screaming. The room grew completely still. "I rushed in regardless. Caught shrapnel, burned my hands, lost several fingers." He examined his right hand, clenched into a fist. "The 3rd man was trapped. I pulled him free, then everything went black. Nobody spoke." James inhaled deeply. "When I regained consciousness, they told me I'd earned a Silver Star, but they never explained how to continue living with what I'd witnessed or what I'd failed to accomplish." Maddie stood then and walked over to refill the coffee pot, a subtle gesture allowing James a moment to compose himself, but then he looked directly at her. 2 years ago, I couldn't enter a room without flinching. Duke helped immeasurably, but you, he nodded toward her, you provided a place for healing. You never questioned. You simply treated me like I mattered. Maddie's hands paused on the coffee pot handle. James lowered himself slowly, and for the first time, Rebecca reached across the table and touched his arm. Thank you, she whispered. Later that afternoon, Maddie sat in Colonel Reynolds' office, the weight of the morning's conversation still lingering. He paced slowly by the window, speaking with someone in Washington. His tone remained clipped but composed. Understood. No, she hasn't accepted yet. Yes, I'll discuss it with her again. He ended the call and turned toward Maddie. They want to offer you a national position, he stated without preamble. She blinked in surprise. What type of position? Director of Community Veteran Initiatives. It would involve travel, speaking engagements, establishing programs like this nationwide. Maddie sank into her chair. And if I decline? You remain here. Continue your current work. We'll support either decision. She hesitated. I never sought any of this, she admitted. No, he replied, but you've earned it. She studied the photograph on his desk, a black and white image of a younger Reynolds standing in muddy fatigues with two fellow Marines. May I speak candidly, she asked. Please do. I don't want to become a symbol. I simply want to continue meaningful work. Reynolds nodded. Perhaps that's precisely what this country requires. That evening, Maddie called her father. He didn't answer immediately, probably watching vintage westerns with excessive volume. Eventually, he picked up. Hey, kiddo, his warm voice greeted her. Settling in? More or less. She paused. Dad, have you ever felt like you were participating in something greater than yourself? He chuckled. Every single time I donned that uniform. Maddie smiled. Even during difficult moments? Especially then. She swallowed nervously. I have a decision to make. I know you'll choose correctly, and that was his only comment. The following morning, the outreach center was filled beyond capacity. More veterans than usual. James's story had circulated, drawing new participants. Some had driven considerable distances. Several had never discussed their service with anyone previously. Maddie stood before them all. She surveyed the room, the aged wooden floors, folding chairs, walls now adorned with photographs of veterans and their service animals. Then she inhaled deeply. I've been offered something significant, she announced. But honestly, nothing feels more meaningful than this. The room fell silent. So I'm staying. Applause erupted. Colonel Reynolds, standing quietly in the back, smiled approvingly. She wasn't merely their hostess anymore. She had become their voice. And across town in Kyle Benson's office, a new report appeared on his desk. This one wasn't about café violations. It concerned him, and it began with 5 damning words. Conduct unbecoming of a public official. For the first time, he faced investigation himself. The storm he initiated was reversing course toward him. 3 weeks passed, and Fort Garrison's outreach center had evolved beyond a pilot program. It thrived. Every Wednesday morning, vehicles lined up outside before sunrise. Veterans from surrounding counties arrived with service dogs, canes, wheelchairs, and silent burdens too heavy to name. Maddie called them morning warriors. Some stayed briefly, some conversed for hours. Others simply sat quietly but kept returning. One afternoon, Rebecca painted a sign and hung it near the coffee station. No rank here, just respect. It became the center's unofficial motto. Just as everything seemed settled, an official letter arrived, marked with the Department of Defense seal. It was addressed directly to Colonel Reynolds. He opened it cautiously in his office. Maddie sitting across from him, sensing something wasn't right. What is it? She inquired. His jaw tightened. They're dispatching a review board, he explained. 3 inspectors from the civilian sector. They want to evaluate compliance and standards across all veteran community programs. Is that standard procedure? Not this quickly, Not this detailed, and not when it appears targeted. Maddie frowned. Targeted how? Reynolds leaned forward. I suspect someone's pushing this from within the state office. Probably someone seeking to discredit us. Maddie's heart sank. Kyle Benson. The colonel nodded. He still maintains connections in influential positions, but now he has something to lose. The review board arrived 4 days later. 2 men in business attire, 1 woman with a severe bun and colder smile. They introduced themselves mechanically, documented everything continuously, and examined the outreach center with silent judgment. They scrutinized everything: kitchen safety, therapy documentation, animal kennels, even Maddie's coffee machine. One asked her, "What certifications do you possess to conduct therapeutic support sessions?" She regarded him steadily. None, just compassion and consistency. He didn't smile. Word traveled rapidly. By evening, the outreach center felt more like a tribunal than a sanctuary. Veterans arrived nervously, uncertain whether to speak openly. Several muttered, "They'll shut it down." James Walker sat silently in his customary place, hand resting on Duke's head. He hadn't spoken since the reviewers arrived, but Maddie had finished being silent. The next morning, she requested a meeting with everyone: veterans, staff, volunteers, even the inspectors. The conference hall filled by 8 a.m. Maddie stood at the front wearing her typical outfit: jeans, boots, and a support those who serve t-shirt. "I understand why you're here," she stated calmly, "and I recognize what certain individuals hope you'll discover. But before reaching conclusions, I want you to meet those this program has helped." She turned. "James, would you speak again?" James rose slowly, approached the front. The room quieted completely. "I believed I didn't deserve assistance," he said, "but Maddie showed me I didn't need to earn it. I simply needed to accept it." He gestured toward Rebecca. She smiled for the first time here. Rebecca offered a slight nod, eyes glistening. Then one by one, others stood. An elderly veteran with a cane, a young amputee with trembling hands, a Marine sergeant who admitted he hadn't communicated with his children in 6 years until the previous week. They all rose, not shouting, not pleading, just standing. Their silence spoke volumes. That evening, the lead inspector requested a private conversation with Maddie. They met in Colonel Reynolds' office, where he waited with arms crossed. The inspector cleared his throat. "We've examined every file, interviewed every participant. What we witnessed today wasn't merely a program, it was a community." Maddie remained silent. "Miss Crane," he continued, "we'll be recommending this center as a national model. We've never encountered anything comparable." Relief washed over her like a wave. Colonel Reynolds smiled genuinely for the first time that day. But the inspector wasn't finished. "One more thing," he said, presenting her with a folder. "You're being nominated for a civilian commendation for service to national veteran welfare." Maddie opened the folder and stopped breathing. It bore the Secretary of Defense's signature. The following morning, Maddie arrived before anyone else. She stood in the quiet center, gazing at the wall of photographs lining it. She reached up and pinned a new one in the center: James, Duke, Rebecca, and herself. Beneath it, a brass plaque with just 5 words: "This place saved my life." Then someone entered through the front door. She turned. It was Kyle Benson, but not in professional attire. He wore civilian clothes, eyes hollow, shoulders slumped. Maddie remained motionless. He approached holding a thin envelope. "I resigned," he said quietly, "before they could terminate me." She glanced at the envelope. "What's this?" He hesitated. "A written apology, and something else, from someone you helped long ago. A name you might remember." She opened it carefully. Inside was a photograph, her and a uniformed man years earlier, smiling before the café. The note read, "Tell Maddie she rescued me before I even recognized I was lost." Tears welled in her eyes. She looked up. Kyle Benson had already departed, but his actions would never be the final chapter, because what Maddie built no longer belonged solely to her. It belonged to every veteran who walked through those doors. And nothing, not politics, not vengeance, not fear, could diminish that reality. The invitation arrived in a navy blue envelope sealed with the Department of Defense emblem. National Veterans Leadership Conference, Washington, D.C. It was addressed to Maddie Crane with a handwritten note below. Your story has become our story. Will you address us all? Colonel Reynolds discovered her in the therapy room kneeling beside a new veteran recently paired with his dog, a golden retriever named Faith. Appears you have another assignment, he remarked, extending the envelope. Maddie read it carefully, then exhaled deeply. She didn't want to attend. In truth, she disliked podiums, disliked attention. She preferred pouring coffee and remembering birthdays, not entering grand auditoriums with cameras and high-ranking officers. But this transcended her personal comfort. It wasn't about her anymore. And when Rebecca squeezed her hand and whispered, "You represent all of us," Maddie understood. She had to go. The conference day dawned cold and gray, Washington shrouded in mist and marble. Maddie stood at the base of the Capitol, gazing upward at its imposing columns, her speech folded tightly in her pocket. She wore a navy blazer over jeans. Nothing elaborate, just enough to feel courageous. Then a familiar voice behind her. "Need transportation, Miss Crane?" She turned. James Walker stood there, dressed in full marine blues, polished impeccably. Duke trotted proudly beside him, tail wagging as though he sensed the occasion's importance. "James," she exclaimed. He nodded. "The base assigned me as your escort." She laughed, partly from nerves, partly from amazement. "You look distinguished," he smirked. "You're about to address Pentagon officials." She sobered instantly. "I'm unprepared." "You are ready." They walked side by side through security checkpoints, past journalists, into echoing marble corridors. Inside the main chamber, hundreds of military personnel, commanders, officials, and veteran advocates filled the seats. On stage stood a podium bearing her name. Maddie's hands trembled visibly. James leaned closer. "Remember what you always told me?" She looked at him questioningly. He smiled. "Just be authentic. That's sufficient." When Maddie approached the microphone, the room hushed. She scanned the audience and began. "I'm not a physician. I'm not a general. I'm not particularly remarkable. Really." Pause. "I managed a small coffee shop near a marine installation. I memorized every regular's preference and maintained a notebook behind the counter with notes like, 'David prefers additional cinnamon,' or 'Mrs. Carter lost her daughter last winter. Ask how she's managing.'" Scattered laughter. "But here's what I discovered. Veterans don't need elaborate speeches. They don't need perfect policies. They need environments where they're acknowledged, remembered, and respected." She paused again, her throat constricting. "My father served as a Marine. He returned different, quieter, more distant. I was just a child. I didn't comprehend PTSD. I simply thought he no longer cared about us." Silence. "One night I discovered him on the porch staring vacantly, holding his service weapon." Gasps rippled through the audience. I said nothing. I just remained with him. Hours passed. Eventually, he set the gun aside. He looked at me and said, "Thank you for staying." Tears traced down her cheek. "So no, I'm not a therapist. I'm not a soldier. I'm simply someone who remained present, who prepared coffee, who listened." She gazed directly into the crowd. "And I will never stop." Thunderous applause followed. Later that evening, Maddie stood alone outside the venue. The sun descended over the Potomac. She needed fresh air. A shadow appeared beside her. An elderly gentleman, white beard, weathered hands, dark eyes behind gold-rimmed spectacles. He smiled gently. "You don't recall me?" he asked. She tilted her head quizzically. "Should I?" He produced a photo yellowed with age. Her, years younger, offering a sandwich to a disheveled man outside the cafe. "That was me," he explained. "You provided lunch every Wednesday for months." She gasped in recognition. "You wore the green cap." He nodded. "I was homeless. Hadn't communicated with my daughter in a decade. Believed I didn't merit another opportunity. He paused. I do now. Because of you. He pressed something into her palm. A pin. Aged silver. Shaped like an eagle's wing. I wore this when I reunited with my family. It belongs to you now. She attempted to speak, but only tears emerged. That night in her hotel room, Maddie sat by the windowsill, pin in hand. For the first time in weeks, she experienced tranquility. Not emptiness, not overwhelm, just peaceful reflection. And somewhere deep within her chest, where sorrow once resided, something warm finally took root. Not pride, not authority, just serenity. The aircraft landed in North Carolina just past noon. Maddie disembarked carrying only her duffel bag, the silver eagle pin still fastened discreetly to her blazer. She hadn't spoken much since the conference. Her phone contained dozens of unread messages, news organizations, veteran groups, even an invitation from the governor. But she only wanted to return home. And by home, she didn't mean her apartment. She meant Liberty Perks Café. The establishment remained unchanged. Same creaking entrance, same coffee-stained counter, same aroma of cinnamon and toast. I stood behind the register, surprised when Maddie entered. Aren't you supposed to be famous now? I teased. I'm just here for coffee, Maddie smiled. I poured silently and slid the cup across the counter. Then I leaned closer. You rescued this place, Maddie. After your departure, it lost its essence. Maddie surveyed the room. Photographs still adorned the walls, but new ones had appeared. Rebecca, James, Aurora, veterans embracing, laughing. The cafe had transformed because she had transformed it. Later that afternoon, Maddie drove to her father's favorite fishing location, a secluded curve in the woodland by the lake. She brought two items, the pin and the silver star. The breeze rustled the foliage gently as she sat beside the water, placing both objects on a flat stone. Hey, Dad, she whispered. I accomplished it. I stood firm. I remained. She closed her eyes. I finally comprehend why you simply sat here. Sometimes silence communicates most effectively. She left the pin facing the water. The following week, Fort Garrison held its annual Veterans Day ceremony, typically drawing modest attendance. This year, every space filled completely. The Outreach Center arranged additional seating outdoors. Soldiers volunteered to transport elderly veterans in golf carts. A choir of military children performed the anthem. At the ceremony's center stood a new monument, not depicting a soldier, not a general, but a woman holding a coffee cup kneeling beside a service dog. No name, just 5 engraved words. Kindness, courage, community, coffee, home. Maddie observed from the back, astonished. She hadn't authorized it. She hadn't even known about it. Colonel Reynolds joined her. We decided it was time to immortalize the genuine hero, he remarked. She fought tears. I didn't do anything extraordinary. He regarded her meaningfully. Exactly. As the event concluded, veterans and families placed flags around the statue's base. Rebecca delivered a brief speech, her first public address. James and Duke posed for photographs with schoolchildren. Then, without prompting, dozens formed a line, not to salute, not to weep, but to embrace Maddie individually, silently, expressing gratitude in ways words never could adequately convey. That night, as sunset bathed Fort Garrison, Maddie returned to the Outreach Center alone. The room stood quiet, the atmosphere warm. Outside, several veterans lingered, conversing near the fire pit. She stood before the wall of photographs, now overflowing with images. Then she reached into her bag and withdrew one final item, a new picture. Her and her father from childhood, him in uniform, her with pigtails, both holding a miniature American flag. She pinned it centrally and beneath it placed a handwritten note. He served his country. I served those who returned home. Then she switched off the lights and walked into the evening, not isolated, but encompassed by a legacy of quiet strength, simple actions, stories that would forever remain honored. And as the door closed behind her, the breeze carried a whisper through the trees. Thank you, Maddie. In our darkest hours, compassion always finds a path forward, often in the quietest corners. Not everyone,